Hey guys, welcome to Blue Collar Catholic. Before I get started, I just want to address the nose strip in the room. If you're wondering why I'm wearing a nose strip, you need to watch my last video. I think it was called Mafia Bars and Church Ushers, where I explain why church ushers remind me of bouncers and mob clubs I used to hang out in back in Jersey when I was younger. And it's not a bad thing, actually. You have to watch it. It's actually a good thing. But I also talk about why in some of my videos I might wear a nose strip. So today I want to talk to Catholic YouTubers and those of you who want to be a Catholic YouTuber. There's many reasons you shouldn't take my advice, and there's some reasons you might want to take my advice. So I'll give you the reasons why you might not want to take my advice. I've been doing this for about 10 or 11 years now, and I got less than 20,000 subscribers. There's guys that have been doing it for a year that have twice as many. You might not want to take my advice if you want to make a lot of money. I still work a full-time job and still live paycheck to paycheck. So if you're looking to blow up your channel with a lot of views and make a lot of money, I'm probably not the guy to get advice from, honestly. I'm just being real. A few reasons you might want to listen to me. By the grace of God, and all good gifts come from God. I have 5 children, 14 grandchildren, and I'll be married 40 years in October. All my children love Jesus Christ. All my grandchildren love Jesus Christ. My wife and I love Jesus Christ. We all love each other. We all get along great. We're a tight-knit family. And it's not easy to accomplish this. It's truly the grace of God. A lot of struggles, a lot of hardships, a lot you go through as a family to get to this place. But I tell you the truth, I would not change it for all the money Elon Musk has. So, or the right cross Mike Tyson has. I wouldn't change it. So, this is who I am. And advice is free. You could take it or leave it. You know, you could take what is useful to you, and what's not useful, let it go. But, you know, in Rocky 1, from 1976, Rocky sees his friend's little sister hanging out with a bad crowd. So he walks her home and he tries to give her, like an older brother would to a younger sister, advice. And he's going on and on the whole walk home, and she seems like she's listening. And then when she gets to the door and Rocky says goodnight to her, she says, "Rocky, screw you." So sometimes when I give my advice, I get that. Like, you know, I was Protestant for 30 years. And when I see these young Protestants on YouTube, I'll reach out to them in an email. And they don't respond. And then I'll make a video trying to talk to them and tell them why they're wrong. And I'll get a screw you a lot of times. I'll get some nasty, return videos back, response videos, and I'll get some nasty comments. Or they'll just ignore me, like in the case of Girls Gone Bible. One of my longtime subscribers, and I call him a friend now, even though we haven't met, we email and correspond a lot, and I really value his advice. He's been through seminary, lifelong Catholic. He's always in the comments as GIP, G-I-P. And he emailed me a video of Girls Gone Bible when they had less than 1,000 subscribers. And he says, "These girls remind me of what you said you were like when you were a baby Christian, a young evangelical. Maybe you can talk to them." And because they like grew up Catholic and they don't even realize what they're doing. So I watched the video and I realized, yeah, they're like in the infancy, baby, like newborn evangelical Christians. And they weren't saying anything bad about Catholicism, but I knew they were just like I was. And thank God there was no YouTube when I was that young 19-year-old evangelical who just had a conversion in Navy boot camp. And I knew their conversion was real. They had an experience, an encounter with Jesus, but their theology was as bad as mine. So I emailed them, reached out and said, hey, I would love to talk with you girls. And, you know, kind of like I would do a little sister, or like they're age, literally the age of my daughter. And no response. And Gip said to me, these girls are going to blow up because they're just beautiful. And they were. Their face was attractive and their personality is very attractive, just really sweet girls. But they knew zero about theology. Their theology was wretched. I mean, it was like really lame. They didn't know what they were talking about. And so I made a video about them, tried to, you know, get their attention, and they ignored me. And now they blew up like we expected. I don't even know how many they got last, maybe 1 million subscribers by now. They do speech, they go to churches and speak, and their theology still sucks. They still don't know what they're talking about. You know, and I say that, I was there. I'm not saying that like as a bash to these girls, but they're very well spoken and they look nice. So a lot of people want to listen. But now they're anti-Catholic, just like I knew they would be, you know. But thankfully, took me 30 years to go from where they were at when they started their YouTube channel to become Catholic. And that was like 11 years ago. I came back to the Catholic Church, so just like they were. I was baptized, made communion, and just like they were, just a normie Catholic, and then left the Catholic faith, became evangelical, and then came back to the Catholic faith. That's why they say weak Catholics become Protestants, strong Protestants become Catholic. This is a true saying. But it took me 30 years, a lot of reading, books. But now with the internet and all you Catholic YouTubers, I think they'll come back a lot sooner than I will. And then sometimes I call out Catholic YouTubers, not, you know, tell them where I think they're in error. And I usually don't get any response from them, but I'll get like really nasty comments from their followers and really, really harsh emails. But recently I called out, and, you know, Anthony Abate in Avoiding Babylon. And I started the video with reading the Proverbs, how an open rebuke from a friend is sweeter than a kiss from an enemy, and how men sharpen men like iron sharpens iron. And I didn't know how he would receive it, but he received it well. He was very charitable in his response. We agreed to disagree, but he said maybe he wasn't clear enough in what he was saying. And what he said was that all the popes after Vatican II are ashamed of the gospel, or ashamed of Jesus Christ. And I said, you know, you need to repent of that. And he didn't think he needed to, and he gave his explanation why he said it and what he meant. And I still disagree, but we were able to talk like grown adults and you know, grown men, brothers that have a disagreement. And I generally like him, and I think he's funny. I think Rob on the show is funny, and Nick is funny. I think it's a great show. I think they should stick to current events. When they talk about current events, it's funny. So before I get to more things, I want to speak on that a little bit too. Nothing too critical, just where disagreements were. But I want to talk about priorities. If you're doing YouTube or you want to do YouTube, yeah, definitely do it. You know, I have people ask me, should I do it? I'm like, yeah, do it. You know, just number one, be authentic. You know, my boss was, he was talking about a study. He said he was going to send it to me. He hasn't had a chance yet. He's seen us like a scientific study where they measure the energy coming off your body. You know, like sometimes you get like, I don't have hair anymore, but I shave it, but you know, sometimes you get electric static in your hair. It's just energy from your body. It's like electrical energy. I don't know the whole science behind it. Some people call it different things, chi, energy, whatever. But it's basically just electricity that our body generates. They were saying the lowest amount of energy is generated when you're listening to negativity, or when you're being negative and complaining. What's higher than that, much higher than that, is when you're being positive and happy, and you're listening to people that are positive and happy. You're generating a higher level of energy. But the highest level of energy the scientists found was when people were being authentic and when they were listening to people who were authentic. So be authentic. If you're not a theologian, don't pretend you're a theologian. If you're a guy that lives in a $2 million home, don't pretend you're a regular guy with a webcam. You know, I mean, you can make it. I mean, there's guys, literally guys out there like this that I just described that are got millions of subscribers, but I would say don't do it. You can listen to me, or, you know, and be broke like me, or you can do it and gain the whole world. It's the choice is yours, is what I'm saying. And then have your priorities straight. This is, as Christians, this should be our priorities. God first, family second, ministry third. You know, your work, you got to work your work in there, however, but like when you have the choice, time spent, you know, your time spent with God should be number one. Your time spent with your family should be number two, and your ministry should be number three. Now, a lot of us get ministry and God confused. Billy Graham pointed this out years ago. He said his biggest regret was not putting his family above his ministry. He thought that his ministry was putting God first. And he said he was wrong. And he's right that he was wrong. And he said, so while he was out saving the world, going on all these crusades, evangelizing everybody, and he was a friend of Catholics. He got criticized for calling Catholics his Christian brothers, but side note. But while he was out saving the world and doing all these crusades and stuff, he put his son, Franklin Graham, in boarding school. Hardly seen the kid. The kid grew up hardly knowing his dad. And of course, his kid rebelled and started running with a biker gang, doing drugs. And Billy Graham said it's only the grace of God that he returned back to the faith. I think he was like 30. So don't get ministry and God confused. In fact, I thought I was doing this a few months back. I got convicted. Like I was just always on my phone and always, you know, worried about, you know, this and that. It was like YouTube. And I just took my channel down. And I remember John from Catholic for Rednecks kept texting me like, bro, what happened? I got people blowing up my phone. Did Rob get taken off of YouTube? Because he got taken off of YouTube. I got demonetized for like 6 months after the 2020 election because of what I said about it. But I took it down, and I didn't know if I could put it back up. You know, I'm not very technically savvy. I just took it down, and I seen how to take it down. I took it down, and that was it. I was no looking back. I was like, I'm not doing this, you know. And then, you know, I prayed about it, talked to my wife, talked to my kids, and we all agreed I need to come back on. And I didn't even know if I could, but my kids figured out how to get me back on. But I was down for, I don't know, a few days, a week maybe. So yeah, so God, family, ministry. Don't get ministry and God confused. And then remember, the church, if you're a Catholic, the church teaches every baptized Catholic is an evangelist. Again, this is my opinion based on what the church teaches. This is the advice if you want to be a Catholic YouTuber, take it or leave it. Your number one goal should be to save souls, not to get views, not to make money. Your number one goal should be to save souls. And I had said that, and you know, sometimes when you speak, people misunderstand you, just like people always misunderstood Pope Francis, but people misunderstand me a bit. And the Void in Babylon guys thought I was saying they never evangelize. I was saying the crowd they run with never evangelizes. All they do is sit around and criticize the popes. And I never hear them evangelizing. And he said, I'm not here to evangelize. That's the church's job. And I did a response video and said, no, it's not. We're all evangelists. And he said, I don't even put Catholic in the name. You know, we're just three guys talking about current events that happen to be Catholic. We're giving a Catholic point of view. And that's cool. You know, that's, you know, Michael Knowles does that. That's cool. But I still think our number one goal should be evangelize. And, you know, Void in Babylon has the coolest intro to their channel, like really cool music and chants. And it says, the time of lukewarm Catholicism has ended. So you think they're going to be like evangelizing people to become Catholic, you know? And again, I'm not telling you as someone, the advice I'm giving you isn't going to make you rich. The advice I'm giving you isn't going to get you a bunch of views. I'm telling you, we need to evangelize. And I'm telling you from personal experience, I was a Protestant evangelical for 30 years. And I led a lot of people out of the Catholic Church into evangelicalism. I'm telling you. And I've been back at the church for 11 years, and I've led a lot of people out of Protestantism back into Catholicism by the grace of God. By the grace of God. And I'm telling you, this should be our goal. You want your children to stay Catholic. You want your spouse to stay Catholic. You want your family to stay Catholic. Evangelization has to be your number one goal. Now, and it's funny that Anthony said that, because the crowd he runs with, again, and I was talking to him, and he kind of like thought I was saying that he was convinced by guys like Taylor Marshall to hate the Pope, and he came to this on his own because he's been Catholic his whole life. He loved Pope Francis, loved Pope Benedict, but Pope Francis was different. And what I was trying to say is, like that little girl on Rocky, sometimes if you're hanging with a certain crowd, you become like that crowd. You just trust them because they're your friends. You're not, your guard isn't up. You're not critically thinking, because his crowd was, but what's ironic is, so maybe he doesn't listen to his crowd as much as I thought. Maybe I was wrong, and I could be wrong. Everything I'm saying, I could be wrong. I know this. So don't just take my word for it. Pray about what I'm saying. Check the catechism, read your Bible, see if what I'm saying is true. Like St. Paul said about the Bereans. But what I found ironic is his crowd, Taylor Marshall and those guys, criticized Pope Francis, saying Pope Francis says we shouldn't evangelize. And that was like a big thing for a while. There was always something, where they got a bunch of views bashing Pope Francis. That was a thing. Pope Francis tells us not to evangelize. And where that came from, Pope Francis was talking, I think, to some Jesuits. I forget, I remember reading it. I'm going to give you a paraphrasing from what I remember. You can look it up. But he was saying, we don't proselytize, we evangelize. Proselytize, you make people dependent, you take away their freedom. Evangelization, you're giving freedom to people. He said, and he quoted Pope Benedict, he quoted Pope St. Paul VI. He's like, you want to make the Christian faith attractive where people want it. You don't want to make them, like, trap them in. And then he was asked, well, how can you describe, like, more deeply the difference between proselytizing and evangelizing? And he said, there's these prosperity preachers in Protestantism. And he said, not all Protestants are bad. We can fellowship with some Protestants, we can get along. And I would say the same thing. And I feel the same thing about these prosperity preachers, word of faith, name it and claim it, health and prosperity guys. I feel the same way as Pope Francis does. He said, these guys are evil. They're proselytizing. They're telling you, if you follow Jesus, you're going to get a lot of money. If you follow Jesus, you're going to not get sick. This is not the gospel. This is a false gospel. Like, he called them out as preaching a false gospel. And he says, evangelization, you bring people to Jesus by attracting them. And then he quoted, he said, St. Francis of Assisi said, always preach the gospel, and then sometimes use words. In other words, show them the gospel in your life. Again, be authentic, be real. Show them how Jesus changed your life. And they'll want Jesus, and they'll make that choice freely. They're not going to be like in bondage, like these word of faith guys. Like, they feel like if they're hurting financially, they didn't give enough, or they're sinning. If they're sick, they haven't given enough. This is proselytizing. This is evil. So then Pope Francis ended it by saying, proselytizing, no. Evangelizing, yes. So, of course, Taylor Marshall comes out with the video, got a ton of views, that says Pope Francis is not to proselytize. And in the video, he starts quoting all these popes that says we need to evangelize. We're reading the Bible where we need to evangelize. You see, like, he played a word trick, and he never told you exactly what Pope Francis said, just that one quote, don't proselytize. So then it, it blew up. Pope Francis saying don't evangelize. He did the same thing with the homosexuality isn't a crime thing. He's like, he had a video. Pope Francis says homosexuality is not a crime. And he reads all the scriptures that clearly say homosexuality is a sin, and thousands of comments saying, I can't believe Pope Francis doesn't think this is a sin. And he never corrects anybody. And he never tells them the full quote. Pope Francis was in a Muslim country trying to convince these Muslim leaders to stop killing homosexuals just for being homosexual. And the AP News asked him straight out, is homosexuality a sin? Pope Francis said directly, yes, homosexuality is a sin, but homosexuality is not a crime that should be punished by death. And you might be saying, oh, you might be like really radical and say, yeah, homosexuals should be killed. Well, the Old Testament said they should be stoned. Well, the Old Testament said adulterers should be stoned. And Jesus said, if you lust after a woman in your mind, you're an adulterer. Jesus said, the Old Testament says murderers should be stoned. And Jesus said, if you have an angry thought against a brother, you're guilty of murder. So this is what the legalists do. They look on the outward. Jesus teaches us to look inward. This is the gospel. It transforms us inward. And if you have an encounter with Christ, you can understand this. And a lot of these guys that hated Pope Francis, they were all outward, like the Pharisees. I'm not saying this about avoiding Babylon. He seems like he genuinely knows Jesus and he's a Christian. I'm not saying this about anybody in particular. I'm just saying in general. And then you've seen what was another thing he did about abortion? Taylor Marshall did this about abortion. Pope Francis, he plays a clip of Pope Francis being asked, what do you think about Roe v. Wade? And he says, I really don't know much about American law, so I can't comment on the case itself. So Taylor Marshall takes that clip and starts showing all, the reasons why he's wrong. Abortion's a sin. I can't believe we got a pope that can't say abortion is a sin. And I was like, I'm thinking to myself, Pope Francis is the most outspoken Christian leader of our time against abortion. He was the guy who said abortion is the gravest immortal sin. It's like hiring a hitman. If you hire an abortion doctor, I'm like, what is he talking about? So again, I go read the whole quote. And Pope Francis said, I don't know much about American law, so I can't talk about the law. He said, but we know with science that that's taking a human life, and it's never right to take a human life. He said abortion is the gravest immortal sin, and he went on for 20 minutes talking about how abortion is a sin. But if you only watched Taylor Marshall, you thought he was saying he can't comment on abortion. And the same thing with the time the Amazonians brought a statue into the Vatican, and you clearly heard the woman say, Our Lady of the Amazon. They carved what they thought was Mary. And these were all, there were religious scholars that looked into these people and events, and they said, no, this wasn't a pagan event. These were all devout Catholics. And in fact, the religious scholars say these people wouldn't even know what Pachamama was. That was on the other side of South America. But Taylor Marshall named it Pachamama, and all his followers called it Pachamama. even after he got caught dead to rights in a lie. I don't know if you've seen the video, but when the dude threw the idols, threw the statues, and I was Protestant for 30 years. We use this line all the time. Catholics worship idols. So he just took an old Protestant slur and made it more believable for his Catholic audience. Why would you do that? I don't know, but he had a video. It's early in the morning. It's early in the morning. I don't know if it's this early. I'm actually doing this at 4 a.m. because, like I said, we put our family first, and Saturday morning I like to have coffee with my wife and talk about what's happening. So I don't know if it was 4 in the morning, but it was early in the morning. He said, I haven't shaved. I haven't even combed my hair, but I just got this text, this email. This guy just threw the statue in the email. I don't know who this guy is. And he shows the guy throwing the statues in the river. Then a few days later, he goes, I actually have the guy on who threw the statues. He's like, we're so proud of you. How do you say your name? What's your name? He acts like he didn't know the guy. And the guy's like, Alexandra. And so he's still playing off like he doesn't know the guy. And the guy must not have seen the original video he made where he pretended he didn't know anything about this. He was surprised, woke up out of sound sleep. So the guy says, oh, we should tell everybody how we planned this, how we went to Rome, how we met in Rome, and you paid for me to do this and paid for my flight back, and you edited everything for me and uploaded it that morning. And Taylor Marshall got this worried look on his face. He's like, yeah, I wasn't ready to tell people that, but yeah, we met in Rome, and yeah, we had this plan. And he said, yeah, as soon as I was up in the air, I sent you that and said, okay, post it. Caught in a total lie. He took that video down, but a lot of people kept it. Peter Diamond, who hates the Pope as much as Taylor Marshall did, Pope Francis at the time, he put one up called Taylor Marshall Publicity Stunts and put the two videos side by side. I think Lofton and Trent Horn put them up. So it was an obvious lie and publicity stunt, but his followers still follow him. And again, like I said, this guy has over 1 million followers. He's a millionaire. I have less than 20,000 followers, and I live paycheck to paycheck. So the choice is yours. You could lie, you could misrepresent things, you could do these publicity stunts and get huge and make a lot of money. But Jesus said this, what does it gain a man if he gains the whole world but loses his own soul? Rather, he said, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his own soul? So that's all I'm saying. If you want to be a Catholic YouTuber, go for it, I don't care if you've been a Catholic a minute. People will say, oh, no, you shouldn't, you should wait till you're Catholic a while. Just let people know, I've only been a Catholic a minute. I'm no theologian. I make it clear. When I do my segment, Blue Collar and a Scholar, you know who the scholar is, and it ain't me. But by the grace of God, I've been able to have awesome guests like Dr. Scott Hahn, the former president of the Evangelical Theological Society, Dr. Francis Beckwith. I've had the president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, Archbishop Timothy Broglio. Like 2 weeks after he was elected, he went to see Pope Francis, and then he came on my channel when I only had like 10,000 subscribers. And this was all profitable. People learn from these guys. So God can use you no matter who you are. I'm just a regular blue collar guy, and God uses me, and he can use you. But you got to put God first. Got to put God first, family second, and your YouTube ministry third. Again, probably more I want to say. I always forget, and that's another thing. I'm not real technically savvy. If you're good with technology, use it. I mean, if you're a young guy that knows technology, use it. I mean, you'll go much further, much faster than me. But I did this to bring some of my Protestant friends back home to the Catholic Church. When I started this, my son Nick, who I did a video about Gen Z Catholics, I interviewed my son. Good video if you want to check it out. He just held the phone like this while I told my friends why so many evangelicals were becoming Catholic, and that was like my first video. Then my son said his shoulders were starting to hurt, so he bought me a tripod. And then the next birthday, he upgraded it and got me a tripod with a globe light around it. So that's what I use. People say, I should do things more professional, and I probably should if I could. Some people say if you're going to do it the best you can, give it all you got. But I kind of go with the G.K. Chesterton philosophy. If something's worth doing, it's worth doing bad. So I have a friend been saying he wanted to start a podcast for years, but he's waiting to get everything perfect, the right equipment. I'm like, dude, just do it, just do it, If you wait till everything's perfect, you'll never do it. But if you're good with technology, by all means, I'm telling you, you'll do way better than me if you have everything, the cameras and, I look at paper notes and sometimes I scribble them. I can't read what I wrote, and afterwards, like, oh man, I did want to say that. But if you have it up on screen, you can show the people what you're reading. That's really cool. And anyway, bottom line is stay Catholic.